Hi, Tamar. Very nice to meet you today.
Hello, Emilio. Pleasure to meet you as well.
Yeah, I gotta say I'm very excited. You know, you've got quite the resume, and I've watched some of the films that you've done composing for, and I loved all of them. I love Mudbound.
When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
He was always different than every member of Congress. Everybody knew what he had done. He was John Lewis.
We're marching today to dramatize to the world that hundreds and thousands of Negro citizens denied the right to vote.
It's all right. It's just a card, must have backfired. They say it stops eventually.
You just come back. Come all the way back.
My nightmare's always the same. I scream.
So first thing I want to jump into is how did you get your start as a composer? And then further along, how did you get your start as being a film composer?
I was in a band in the early 90s, a post-hardcore band that played locally in New York City. And then eventually I went solo. And so I was doing songwriting as a whole. I was writing the lyrics and the melodies for the music that we were performing as a band. And I had like one particular song that I like wrote, you know, the music and everything for as well. And once that band broke up, I was biding my time, just like being a support vocalist for other people and trying to figure out where I wanted to land, kind of getting up, building the steam to, you know, launch my solo career. And so in having a solo career in New York, I was writing my own music, and I kind of evolved from just straight ahead, aggressive melodic rock to incorporate some of the classical informed music of my youth. And I started a experimental chamber ensemble called Psycho Chamber Ensemble. So basically these were compositions. Initially they were string arrangements, chamber arrangements of songs that I was doing in my straight ahead rock project, and also chamber arrangements of songs that I loved from my youth. Anything from Kate Bush and the Smiths to Bad Brains. And eventually I just started writing original material. So that would be like the most, I guess, straight ahead form of, you know, composing chamber ensemble, which is the style that I've most often used in film score composing. So it started there just with my own practice, my personal solo work.
Wow, like that's so interesting to me. So now I want to ask you to describe your role as a composer. What do you do? What specifically do you do within film on a production?
When I come to work as a collaborator on the film, I have a singular mission, and that is to create this music, to compose only. I don't have to really worry about anything else. And of course, in doing that, I'm working very intimately with the director. We're talking about things like the psychological underpinnings of the characters, you know, what the setting is going to be. And for me, it's a dance almost. It's a dance, and it is like making music, but maybe in an orchestra, because I'm thinking of every element of the film, from atmospheric sound to ambient sound. And even sometimes I'm inspired by the color gradient of the film, you know? So I just really have this wonderfully open space to be creative in this deeply connected and emotional way that I don't always have with my solo work because I'm thinking about so many other things. And at the same time, because I have a platform to express myself that is about me, when I come to film, I have no problem staying in my lane and really being able to just, be a collaborator and not take feedback or, the revision process, which can be very, very long and arduous sometimes personally. And so I feel like the two things feed each other. And that's why I really enjoy working in film as a composer.
I love how you're talking about getting all the visual elements as well as the story elements and combining that with the musical element. That's very interesting. Is it challenging to work with the director in the sense of your own vision versus their vision? Is there ever any kind of rift with that?
So my vision deals specifically with creating the work that suits the purpose that has been established for the music in the film. And I think that for some people, it's difficult for them to parse the difference between having a vision for the music and whatever the set agreed vision for the film is. So when I come in, I like to talk to the director about what they have in mind. There's something called a spotting session where you go through every scene that's going to have music, original score, for instance. And in doing that, I like to talk in terms of like mood, emotion, maybe sometimes colors, but to get an impressionistic view of how the music will function and what purpose it serves. So that's how the vision is established. It's not two separate ideas. And then once that vision is established, as I'm creating themes or working on different cues, if something isn't working, because ultimately it has to resonate with the director. Because they know what they're looking for. And they might not be able to articulate it in musical terms, which is often the case. And it's not good to go there. It's better to go from like an emotional place because there are articulations in music that work with situations in life. Like if you're saying that a scene is very heavy, of course you wouldn't use like high string sounds. If you're saying that you want a cue to represent the breathlessness of a character. Maybe you're speeding up the tempo, or maybe you're using wind instruments. You know what I mean? So that's my job, to use my breadth and depth of skill to bring to life what they feel the scene needs, how it needs to be underscored.
So I want to talk some about like your creative process. So you mentioned to me about the spotting sessions, and then where do you go from there? What's like the middle stage?
So the first part is the instrumental palette. I always like to create a structure that I'm working for so that things don't get scattered. And it also allows me to connect the dots in terms of how the scenes in the film relate to each other. But what I usually do after that is I set out to create the musical arc of the film. From my perspective, like what the original score is going to be. And that most times involves creating themes. And themes can cover a range of elements, from individual characters to places and spaces. For instance, in Mudbound, not only do some of the characters have a theme, but the farm itself actually has a theme that's interwoven. So if we were to use that as an example, the characters Laura and Hap each have, when they're introduced in the film, the piece that's accompanying that is kind of like a drone. It's called a mud drone, and that is the presence of the farm. Because for Laura, it's her being transported to this space that she never imagined because she's a city girl. And for Hap, it's about his struggle in being a tenant farmer as opposed to a landowner. So both of those stories are connected to the physical entity of the farm. And so that's an underlying theme.
How would you say that you see the emotions of a scene, you interpret the emotions of a scene and put it through music? What is your method, or what is your way of doing that?
Sometimes you get it right away. It happens. And I'm grateful for those times. But most often you have to sit with it. And my journey in processing the work, if say it's an adaptation from a novel, I might read the novel. If it's a fictional work based on a person who actually lived. I might read that person's biography or do as much research as I can on that person to find out about what made them tick, the time that they existed in and their type of personality. And I'm doing all of this to get a sense of the place and the space, the time, to kind of fill myself with examples and influences so that I can then be inspired to create something to accompany it.
It seems like you've had a pretty long-standing, professional relationship with Dee Rees, and you've worked on a couple of her films. So, what is it like working with a director like her, and especially like on such a great film like Mudbound?
Mudbound was the first film score I ever composed. It was my first time working in the industry, the film industry. And it was such a unique opportunity and situation because it very much, how do I phrase this? So it wouldn't be possible without the specificity of who Dee is as a human being and an artist, to have the creative control to choose the composer she wanted to work with. And because of her integrity and authenticity, that was like a mental check. And she made sure when it came to Mudbound that she was in that position. And that is the only reason that door opened for me at that time.
Actually, talking a little bit more about Mudbound, what was the core of the sound of that particular soundtrack?
What's the worst thing you ever did?
You betray your own blood. You can't even see your own wife is miserable.
Silence. Oppression. Fear.
This now refers back to the spotting session. So in general, when you're working with directors, people are going to have different dispositions. So they're going to come at it with different, some people will have more or less familiarity with music. Their musical intelligence will be at different places. And some people's vision is very strong. They can visualize every aspect of a film. They know who they want. They know what they want. They know what instruments. And other people are kind of like, let's throw whatever at the wall, or you decide. And for Mudbound, Dee knew that she wanted an intimate chamber ensemble. And part of the reason that she was so adamant about having me work with her on this is because of my work with Psycho Chamber Ensemble. And so she already had a reference to the type of work I did, and that work is very like emotionally centered and melancholy, which was the mood that she wanted for this film. We talked a lot about the physical environment. And that's why this farm ended up having its own theme. And this sense of futility that is generated by class, race, and also the physical, visceral reality of mud and being stuck in it. So again, like lots of concepts, impressionistic, emotional, So that was a major part of creating the sound.
Moving on from Mudbound, but still a little connected to it, I want to know, what's it like working on a documentary like John Lewis' Good Trouble versus a narrative like Mudbound? What is the difference?
So John Lewis' Good Trouble was the first time I'd ever scored a documentary. And there is a connective tissue between that project and Mudbound. As someone who is Afro-Indigenous and whose family here dates to colonial through my enslaved African ancestry and pre-colonial through my Indigenous ancestry, I related to these stories. I was familiar. They're a part of the story of essentially my people.
Are you with me? Let me hear you. 3 civil rights workers that were murdered for trying to help people get registered to vote are looking down on us.
This is a time for action. That's what I learned from John Lewis.
There are forces in America today want to take us back, but we're not going back. We're going forward.
There was a lot of emotion in working on the documentary. For one, because like the fact that he really tried to practice being benevolent to the point, and the nonviolence movement, that you put your body in harm's way for a thought and an idea, and you don't retaliate. And it's like being a pacifist, but on another level, because you can be a pacifist and never put your body in harm's way, or have the opportunity and the privilege to never be in situations where there might be physical violence. But these people literally put their bodies in harm's way for their vision of a more equitable society. And that moved me deeply. And so it was this transitional story, starting with this rural pastoral life in Alabama, and which, that's what I said, it's the connective tissue with Mudbound. And then becoming this activist, right? And there was like this call to arms, a spiritual call to arms and a battle cry in doing this work for voting rights. And then eventually, in a way, him blossoming fully into the halls of the Capitol and becoming a legislator, like what an amazing story arc, right? And so I just really wanted to represent those different phases.
As someone who's overcome a lot of adversity, you said that, both as a woman and being African American, you've overcome a lot of things to get where you are, and then there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of discrimination in the world. What would you say to someone who is working from the bottom and trying to overcome all of that adversity?
All of us have to show up each day with integrity, not phone it in. It doesn't matter if you're someone who comes from great privilege, or if you're someone who comes from a community that suffered great discrimination. We all must show up with integrity. The onus is on those with power to understand that they need to widen their horizon if they truly want their industry, the world that they're creating, to be representative of the world that we exist in. Like if we center everything around maleness and whiteness, how can we say that we're offering the best that humanity has to offer? That's absolutely flawed. Like empirically, it's impossible. So I think that there's just a certain amount of evolution that has to occur, but also a release of the intellectual disingenuousness that exists within these halls of power. Because if you really want to offer the best that humanity has to offer, then you need to include humanity. And so I would say that the onus is not on those who are discriminated and marginalized against. The onus is on those that hold the power.
As a director, I want to know in the future, I want to know how I can best work with a composer. I want to know what I can do best to make sure that I'm maintaining like my vision for the film and also considering them and working in collaboration with them. Mm-hmm. So what can I do to do that?
Okay. So I would only have one, and I wouldn't say it was a rule, but the best piece of advice that I can give you, definitely trust your instincts in terms of who you gravitate towards musically, and understand that it may or may not work. Sometimes, I've been brought on as the second or third composer on occasion. Don't be heartbroken about that. Be committed to carrying through the fruition of your vision, for sure, and whatever is going to serve the film, be ready to be a steward of that. So it might not, line up perfectly with the first choice or the second sometimes. And then I would say that good leadership starts when you pick your team. Because if you pick collaborators that have the work ethic, the skill, and the emotional integrity to collaborate in a way that is healthy and holistic, then you don't have to micromanage, because you've done that work already by who you've chosen. And last, I would say that when it comes time to figure out what's working as they're submitting music, that you're giving notes on what you've heard, you're responding to what you've heard, but you're not giving solutions because that's their job, to create the solution to meet your note.
Wow.
Right? Because they're the composer, right?
What is a piece of advice that you would offer your younger self?
Something that I would say to my younger self is to just stay the course, trust your instincts, and know that you are loved.
Great. Great. That's awesome. Thank you so much.